Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining this edition of Reline Live. Today, I am joined by Mike with the Village of Buffalo Grove. He's the Director of Public Works, and Nick is the Government Performance and Innovation Coach at Cartegraph. Welcome, guys.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Cassie.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited. We have a great turnout for today's session. It looks like I have some familiar faces of Reline Live, so you guys kind of know the routine, but it looks like I have a few newbies too. So welcome. Couple housekeeping items. I am just a moderator. I like to let these guys kind of just run with it themselves, and you guys ask your questions. Use the questions tab or the chat box. I'll be monitoring both of those during our 30-minute Reline Live. If you have anything, if you want to know anything, you want us to follow up with you, just put it in there and somebody will reach out to you after this. Otherwise, you'll all stay on mute. So just use the questions and chat box. And then I'll let you guys go from here.
Sounds good. Thank you, Cassie. Welcome, everyone. We're here to talk about asset management today, which is a topic near and dear to my heart. So we're always willing to jump on and discuss what we're doing here in Buffalo Grove specifically, but also, Nick brings a broader perspective to what's going on in asset management with his role at Cartegraph. We kind of lovingly refer to this as PW 2.0, and we kind of taken a look at what's changing out there, what's changing from resident expectations, what does a public works department of the future need to do and need to be aware of, and asset management is a big component of that. So Nick, if you want to introduce yourself as well a little bit.
You know what, Mike, just excited to be here. The work going on in Buffalo Grove is an example of what high performance government looks like, something we're trying to encourage all our customers to do at Cartegraph. And so as part of that team, definitely see a lot of that. Former public works director here, so big fan of asset and infrastructure. And let's kick it off, Mike. Let's demystify this thing for him.
Excellent. Well, we wanted to play a little bit off of what Josh Malamud, the CEO of Cartegraph, was discussing on your podcast earlier. And one of the questions that came up was, why aren't more people doing asset management, right? What are we afraid of? What's stopping everybody from doing this thing? Dan Kaup is a local director of public works in this area, a neighboring town of Wheeling, and he and I have been doing some presentations on asset management for APWA. But he's really dug out a great quote from Seneca that says, "We suffer more in our imagination than on our reality," right? So basically, we're afraid of a lot of things going into asset management. There might be reasons stopping us from doing this. And as we've talked to other agencies and seen other things throughout the different departments, there are a couple questions that seem to come up all the time. The first one of these is, as asset management rolls out and we're going into the software, your folks are going to be questioning, what is the software doing? What are we doing with it? What's all this information that's being put into a system? Are you trying to replace me, right? No, we're not trying to replace anybody. We're trying to be more efficient with our resources, definitely. There's a time where we're trying to do more with less. We're probably entering a time where we're doing a little bit less with less as we kind of sharpen the pencil and trim back. But the thing we're trying to keep in mind, and we assign the 65% of our time should be proactive maintenance instead of reactive to what's going on around us. Nick, does that line up with what you've seen in other organizations?
Well, I'll say yes and no with a slight twist or whatever. And I'll say that 100% on the 65% of our time should be proactive, not reactive, absolutely where we want to be living at. We don't want the customer to complain. We want our residents to complain. We want to fix it before they complain if we can, right? But what I'll also say is in Colorado Springs, we use the data that we were tracking related to this in order to help protect the jobs of those who are doing the work, because we did have a process of outsourcing and managed competition afoot. And we used the information in Cartegraph to help justify the work that was occurring so that we could preserve public works staff and demonstrate that they were performing the best value for the community. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. If you're not there, it'll help you protect your job. And if you're in that space, it'll help you protect your job. Both good things, right?
Right. Great point, because we're protecting our tax dollars that we receive, right? Our residents have that expectation that we're doing the right thing with that money. That doesn't always mean that we do it in-house, but we also want to prove that when we do it in-house and do it well, we got to have some data that says that, definitely.
And we're not trying to replace you. That's not the goal. Yep.
Exactly. There's enough work to go around. That's not an issue. Yeah, definitely. Sometimes people say, hey, this isn't my job. This might be the job of engineers or a job of admins that are kind of solving this puzzle from the top end. Asset management is a role for everybody, right? Our jobs are changing. This is now part of what we need to do. If you look at the APWA or the ASCE infrastructure report cards and things, we're not scoring A's and they're not scoring B's even. You know, we're in C's across the country. Asset management's important to us right now.
It's all of our
Hey,
jobs.
Mike.
Yep.
Yeah, so we got a great question that came in. Are certain people responsible for certain assets in your organization, or does everybody have different responsibilities?
Yeah, traditionally the role has been our engineering department is in charge of the assets or in charge of at least mapping where they are and maybe, you know, running some long-term programs of how we take care of them. But we've really been moving that down to the operations side.
Okay.
Right. So it is those departments, the street department needs to know what's going on with their streets. Their maintenance that they're doing is getting you, stretching that life cycle out farther, getting you ready to get to a point where there might be a full reconstruction later, but you want to stretch that time in between and really lengthen the time frame between these major repairs. So both the operations section and the engineering section need to work together to do that. And a good asset management program will tie those two together.
Okay. Great questions, you guys. Keep bringing them.
Do you want me to do my job or track the data, right? There's a portion of this that's, I'm out on the street, I'm doing the repair. What do you mean I need to stop to enter some data against that, right? And this is really where the work order and the asset management side of Cartegraph comes in, where once you start rolling out iPads and tablets to the field, people will start asking the question about which part of my job is this? I think fixing the asset's important. I'm not sure where this data is. We need to tell them what the data is doing, right? We need to get everybody informed about where this data is being, you know, used, what bigger decisions are being used with it. And if we don't get that good data on the front end of the projects and the front end of the maintenance, we're not going to be able to make any big long-term decisions from that point.
Love that concept too of basically sweat now so you don't bleed later. I mean, the bottom line is we've got to track this. And if we don't track it, we can't make decisions that are going to make your job easier, which is part of what we're attempting to do. Is we'd like your work to actually matter, right? Let's not waste our time. It's hard to do that if we don't know what we might be wasting our time on, right? So we got to track that data. It is part of the job now. It's PW 2.0. We got to go.
Then after you get the data, or as you're working towards the path to start collecting the data, there's usually concerns about what do we do when we find all these problems. You'll find this will come up if you're going to do a village-wide leak detection, for example, on water mains. What happens when we find all these problems out in the field? What do we do with them then? How are we going to afford to do that if we can't keep up with our reactive maintenance approach right now? So there is a fear around that. This is really kind of an important step to collect the data in public works. We need to analyze it on our end, but we also need to collaborate with our finance department, with our village leadership to figure out how to fund long-term infrastructure improvements.
This data, in my experience, is also one of those things that allows you to actually go back and make intelligent requests of taxpayers for this. We use this information in the system to be able to justify and support the passing of the Pikes Peak Rural Transportation Authority, a dedicated tax to improve our infrastructure. The case was made because we had the data. We didn't have the money at the time, but we had the data. So we were able to find the money later. So I love this point of, I hear that all the time. We can't address it. We're not going to get the funding for this. There's a bipartisan infrastructure bill out there right now. You might get the money. You better have the data, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And if you're not asking for the money, you're never going to get it, right?
Yeah.
That's, yeah.
So we had a Cartegraph specific question. Does MGP assist you with tracking information within Cartegraph?
Yeah. I could probably better answer that question when we get into sort of how the technology is laid out together. MGP provides our GIS services here in the Chicago area. And they're really a consortium of about 40 communities that handle the GIS piece that ties into Cartegraph and moves forward. But we'll jump into some slides in a little bit about that. You know, at the end of the day, who are we, right? We've got a mantra here at Buffalo Grove that we're the long-term stewards of village assets, right? Dang nabbit, gosh darn it, we are. Our assets are in the ground for 75 to 100 years. They're going to outlive all our careers here, but that doesn't mean we can just kind of forget about them for the 30 years that we might put into a public works agency. We are long-term stewards. We need to take a look at this data and collect this data and make these decisions in a long-term method. With that, we'll jump into a little bit of the how at Buffalo Grove, right? So there's really three pillars that we try to pay attention to here in Buffalo Grove. There's a culture piece, there's a strategy piece, and there's a what does success look like at the end of the day piece, right? We talked about this proactive versus reactive approach. If we have a handle on everything, what does that look like? But that's where we're trying to get to. First, we need to figure out how we're going to do this and how our agency is going to relate to it, right? And Nick, I think you at one point when you were presenting to our group here said that culture takes 1/3 of the time to change that it might have been in place, right? And Peter Drucker is also saying culture is going to eat strategy for breakfast, right? We can have all the great ideas, all the good strategy, all the great asset management ideas in the world, and they could die on the vine, depending on how your organization's set up and ready to do that.
How to manage the change, right? And like you said, Mike, it takes about 1/3 of that time. So if you've had a long-standing culture in place, be patient with it. It isn't an easy ship to steer a different direction, but you can get there. And managing that change is just as important as managing the technology. Got to manage the people when we manage the tech. We got to manage both.
Definitely. So one article I just wanted to point out, and we'll run through these ideas kind of quickly here so we can get into the actual asset management pieces. But Gary Pisano had an article in Harvard Business Review called The Hard Truth About Innovation. And really what he was saying is more, an innovative culture is more than just foosball in the break room, right? It's more than what you think of when you think of Google or Amazon or any of these other innovative cultures. The pendulum can swing too far in one direction or another, and he's kind of providing the boundaries for that. So if we run through his 5 tenets real quick, the first one's a tolerance for failure, but no tolerance for incompetence. You need a tolerance for failure where you're failing, maybe 10% of the time. That means you're out there, you're trying new things, you're not just going along with the stream of flow of what you've done forever. Now, if you start failing 50, 60% of the time, you've crossed the threshold, right? So we're getting these bounds around what's that tolerance for failure. It's okay to fail a couple of times. It's not okay to fail all the time. And that rolls into a second tenet, which is a willingness to experiment, but be highly disciplined with it. So when we're trying new things, we're not just throwing the darts at the wall, right? We're picking very carefully what we're headed towards, what's going to give us success, having enough discipline so that we don't lose everybody with just trying a whole bunch of things and nobody knows what direction we're going. His third tenet is psychological safety, but being able to be brutally candid in conversations, being able to speak out and say, hey, I think we're headed the wrong direction on this one. Psychological safety is probably the best example is probably when you think of your friends, right? You've got a group of friends that can probably say anything. They can tell you when you're wrong. They can tell you when, hey, you might need to shower today or something's going on. You have safety built up, right, with them to know that that's coming from a place of betterment, right? It's coming from a place of friendship. It's coming from a place of safety. If you don't have that in the workplace, the candid conversations can't happen. So there's some trust that needs to be worked out through this tenet. Collaboration, but with individual accountability. Any big project, rolling out asset management for the first time or even keeping it rolling, you're going to have a big group that's coming together to work on it. You still need individual accountability so that people aren't getting lost in the sidelines there. And his final tenet is flat leadership, but strong leadership. And this one really talks about a flat organizational chart is going to be fast, right? It's going to be innovative. Things are going to be flying around. Things are going to happen much quicker. But you need strong leadership because as things are happening quicker, they can also derail faster. So leadership's got to be strong enough to keep up with what's going on in those individual situations, know what's going on through the organization. Let the conversations happen at any level, but pull some cohesiveness to that. That ends our culture piece, right? So the strategy here at Buffalo Grove, we knew that we needed to own the discomfort, right? Those things that we were hearing in the background. So we had to push through those fears mentioned earlier. Then we get into the actual strategy, the kind of the smart versus the healthy that Peter Drucker might talk about. What we're tracking, assets, labor, equipment, and materials against those assets, and even our contracted work. And finally, what are we doing with that data? What are the long-term data-driven decisions that we're trying to make? So the method to get through the discomfort a little bit for us meant we had to put on some funny hats. And we had a group of guys here at Buffalo Grove Public Works that were really taking ownership of the asset management plan. Got lovingly referred to as the three Norsemen of the data apocalypse, as they put on the horns and really started busting through some walls, right? So the three Norsemen hate duplicate data entry the way we've always done it, right? We're changing the culture here, we're pushing through. And then we needed a third item for the list. So we had to go to Google, we had to figure out what the Norsemen didn't like. They didn't like the Danish. And we're like, oh, we can relate to that, especially the cheese Danish. We don't know why anybody would put cheese on a pastry. So we had a couple guys pushing through, right? We got through the discomfort a little bit. We had some reminders to say, hey, we're pushing through this thing. It's going to be a little uncomfortable. That little downswing in our comfort level is going to be a big rise on the back end of once we get everything rolling. So we got to push through, got to get through. We had a mantra there that kind of touched on it. Don't enter data twice. Where was Buffalo Grove at before we had a fully integrated asset management system? We had a Lotus Notes database here that might track a request that came in from a resident. We had, some other database in Excel or in Microsoft Access that would track our time, would track the materials costs in another place. Anytime we did a job, we were entering data in multiple locations, and it was just too much, right? So technology isn't going to drive the innovation. You're never going to be able to buy a software package and be able to fix everything. Your policies, your procedures, that stuff needs to be in place no matter what, even if you're doing things on paper. What the technology can do is help the tech get out of the way of the innovation, give you a catalyst, make life easier once you know the right direction. So this is a slide where we can answer that previous question, Cassie. This is the integrated technologies, or kind of what we have laid out at Buffalo Grove, right? The GIS Consortium Map Office, this is really what comes together as a consortium here in the Chicagoland area. There's 40 plus communities that are involved in that. And it's really a way to share resources where Buffalo Grove doesn't have to hire our own data management team or a database expert, or we could maybe afford one GIS person, but you need more than that if you're going to do this at a high level. So sharing resources in the group is a big part of that consortium. And that gets our assets finalized on a map. This is what we have and what we take care of. Cartegraph is a piece that then ties into all those assets, right? It's our asset management software. So it now, knowing where everything is, can help track the work against those assets. So that's maintenance work, that's big projects to replace something, that's the labor, the equipment, the materials that go against what we're doing, so that all those dollars get entered in one spot and tracked in one location. The other piece of technology that we have is our BG Connect app. What's driving our app in the background is Acella's public stuff. That's another software package that's available. This is really a way for the residents to get in communication with the village, and that's the village as a whole. It's not just public works. It's if you have a property maintenance concern, it'll get routed to community development. If you notice there's a stop sign down, that'll go right to public works. So it's a piece that ties into Cartegraph then for us in public works, but also drives, village-wide where those requests are coming in.
So are these the main technologies you have integrated, or are there other ones that you don't have listed here, Mike?
This is really the big picture. And the great thing about these pieces is that we don't need a whole bunch of other things. The only other piece that we have in public works really that does anything is a timesheet software to make sure that people are getting paid for the work that they're doing, right? Gotcha. Cartegraph is not that timesheet software. Cartegraph is meant to track what we're doing and why, and compare it to contractor costs and all those other things. But these are really the three that's driving the asset. So we can look at a couple of screenshots of Cartegraph. This is actually a screen where our maintenance workers will enter the data in. This is a screen that they'll see on their iPad in the field. And it kind of shows how easy it is for them to get the information punched in. We were talking earlier about the fear of how much time do you want me to spend on entering the data versus actually doing the work? Well, we don't want you to spend all your time entering the data. So having a clean software package to get this data in cleanly is great from a timing perspective. It's also great to get clean information in so that we can make those decisions on, the management end of things. So as you can see here, this is an example from a sanitary sewer line cleaning. And these two employees were out there. They had a couple pieces of equipment. One was a flushing truck and one was another truck. Since we're in COVID formation, we're taking extra trucks out to locations, which increases the cost a little bit, but it's a safety item. And obviously they needed to use some water as they were flushing out too. So they were able to just punch in that I was at this location. I've already got, this sewer on a map somewhere, and I'm going to flush that sewer line. All they have to put in is I spent half an hour out there, right? I use this truck for half an hour. We've got rates built out in the background. They don't have to calculate any of those, costs themselves. They just need to put in what they did and what they used. And what nice thing about Cartegraph is that it will roll all those costs up into this asset now, right? So we know that they did a sanitary cleaning on this blue line on the map. That's the location. We know what the cost was. We know what was used in water. We're tracking all that stuff, and it goes right into that don't enter data twice, right? Enter data once in this location. It's there to be used. What do we do with that stuff then, right? We've got all that data in place. What are the good things that we can do with it? How can we plan long-term with this? One of the things we do is we've got a 20-year capital improvement plan. Buffalo Grove takes a 20-year approach to this. It was something we learned from our neighbors in Lake Zurich, where we used to do a 5-year plan. And the interesting thing about a 5-year plan is that anything that you don't have data on, you say, well, that's a year 6 and beyond problem, right? My friend Dan Kalpin Wheeling over there, he'll argue that we should have 100-year CIPs because that's how long the infrastructure lasts. So wherever you fall in that, that data should be driving some of these. What is the program here? This is a program sheet for annual sidewalk maintenance. What money do you need and when? You've got to have that conversation with your finance department, with your village board to, again, as Nick was saying, find the money for these things. It's important to everybody, but if they don't have a clear view of the picture, how do you get them there?
I like the 20-year CIP, Mike, because 20, 25 years is usually where I try and help people target. When we get out to 30 and 50 years out, so much unknown on that time horizon in terms of how the world will operate. It's really hard to have anything matter in a 50-year horizon that's going to actually be implemented today. But like you said, a 5-year horizon, that's a year 6 project. Real easy way to kick the can down the road, right?
Too easy.
Yep.
Again, we got to own that discomfort a little bit and get ourselves over the hill. So
yeah, Nick, I have a question for you. So after seeing Mike talk through this, would you say, because I run into this a lot too in my industry, there's always going to be budgeting issues, but some of it is fear of not knowing, like in my world, how to, like, let's say slip line a pipe. So it's doing something new is kind of intimidating. Do you think it's fear more or budget more that people aren't already like using this technology on a regular basis?
Well, I think, budget, I think, is the laziest way out. So I'll say that. I think that is the lowest common denominator answer that you can give, because if you're tenacious, there's funding out there for it. There's, ARP funds, there's the infrastructure bill funds. Almost certainly you will be able to justify the use of asset management, which both of them allow for, to be able to fund it. So you could certainly be able to find the funding, in my experience, especially once you realize the amount of assets we're talking about here and the cost of not maintaining them. That's not the conversation we have. So it's always a fear-based, fear of the unknown conversation that I find. And that's why Mike started with that Seneca quote, right? Which is the imagination is way worse than the reality once we dig into it. And, having been both somebody on Cartegraph's team and a customer before, it's let's just get started. Let's track one thing really, really well and start now and start, doing it properly, like Mike's talking about. Then we start to add stuff in. Then we worry about bigger problems and bigger fish. But it's not expensive to get started. And it's usually the fear of the unknown that's keeping people at bay from this. And the way we've always done it, right? Words that'll get you kicked out of my office. But the way we've always done it is a curse word where I come from, but certainly something we're up against, which is that culture piece that Mike was talking about. It takes time to bring the culture along, right?
Yeah.
Not easy.
Great.
That kind of, that transitions us into a conversation that we have is about these bubbles of development in Buffalo Grove, right? And we know that we're working through a bubble of water main that was constructed 60, 70 years ago that we've got to replace. And if we're taking the 5-year approach, or we're sticking our head in the sand, or we're just waiting for something to come along, you're not going to be ready for that bubble of infrastructure. And that's, sort of a problem. It is a problem throughout the nation. We know in Buffalo Grove, and this goes sort of beyond the 20-year outlook, right, that we've got another bigger bubble coming in 2048. So if we don't solve the current bubble, that's really where the long term kind of comes in. Going back to this sheet, and I can share these sheets if anybody's interested, or if anybody wants to find me on LinkedIn or something. I'm happy to share our model here for CIP. But kind of going to Nick's perspective here, we have a very clear 5-year picture on these CIP sheets, and then we kind of have a year 5 to 10, 11 to 15. As we get farther out, the picture gets murkier. Definitely, we understand that, but you don't want to find yourself running into a bubble where you haven't been thinking long term. So important from both approaches. And then we talked about supporting our finance department, right? If you lay out this clear picture of what's needed and when, you've now given them the tools they need to start looking and helping you find funding, or helping with a bonding strategy, or helping with the pieces that I might not be good at as a public works director, but we got a full team here at the village that can support this and get this rolling. So use all this data, support your other departments, get them all involved in the big picture.
When I was a public works director, Mike, one of the things I would always tell people is the most important thing you could do is buy coffee or chocolate for your budget people. Go get to know them and bribe them in small, important ways, because they'll help you find the nickels and the couch cushions that you can't, right? They know where that money's at.
And, even as you get to your village board level too, keep them along, bring them along in the storyline. We sometimes get ourselves, from A to F really quickly because we're in the industry and we understand it. But we've got to bring everybody else along in the storyline too, so that they know what's going, they know what we're looking at. And then as these conversations come up about, say, a rate increase that nobody wants, they understand why then. And we've actually had our village board thank us for bringing rate increases to them. That's a huge connection on that storyline, and that's hard to get to, but it's worth the effort. So another couple of Cartegraph pieces, dashboards, right? So there's long-term decisions, but there's also daily decisions that need to be made, and how does asset management sort of help with that? One of the great things about Cartegraph itself is these dashboards, these widgets that you can build so that you can track what's going on requests or on tasks or daily work that's getting accomplished. This is an example of some screenshots that we pull from our dashboards here in Public Works and put them into a weekly report to, again, help with this storyline with the board, and this report that goes out to more people than just us. And really, when we go back to this sort of proactive versus reactive, what does success look like? We've only been down this avenue for about 6 years here in Buffalo Grove Public Works, but we're already seeing the improvement by heading in the right direction. Cartegraph tracks things 2 ways. One is a request, and that's shown in red, our number of requests by year. And that's really somebody that comes to us as Public Works and says, I think this is broken. I think this isn't working right. I think something needs to happen out here. A very reactive thing, right? We've gotten to the point where somebody's trying to bring to our attention that there's an issue with our infrastructure, with our assets. In green is then the task completed by year. A task is something that we as the village say, hey, this needs to get done. We assign a crew to it. Maybe it's in response to a request, but a lot of it is proactive stuff. This is a maintenance schedule for a piece of HVAC equipment. This is maintenance for a vehicle. This is the proactive maintenance that we do to a road or a sewer or whatever it is. Obviously, you can see that green trend is going up, the red trend is going down. What would you do with your time if you had 1,000 less requests coming through in any given year? Maybe we got some time now with the same amount of resources to really head that proactive route. So we're still in our journey, but it's heading the right direction, and that's really where we need to keep in mind what that success looks like on the back end.
And Mike, you said your threshold for your team is 65%. Is that about right for the proactive versus reactive? That's the goal?
Yeah, that's kind of where we're shooting. And I don't have a reference for that. That's sort of where it feels right now. Maybe we could get to that. Maybe we could stretch it better. But if we don't have a goal, we're not aiming towards anything, right? So when we started sharing this dashboard, this is just a funny aside story to close things out. our fire department was like, whoa, what are you guys submitting to that weekly report that's going on? We don't have anything like that. And they said, can you tone it down a little bit? And our standard answer is, of course not. There's no kill switch on awesome. So bring your public works department up, take on your police and fire departments that have been doing great stuff for a long time. It's all a little peer pressure. It's good. It's good to have that competition. And with that, I think we could jump into some Q&A, Cassie.
Okay, so if you guys have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat box. So I do have a question for you, Nick. When someone is starting from scratch as a customer and a coach, because I think that's kind of your role, where would they start? What's the first step to take?
Well, it's about getting the assets in the system to start with, right? We need to have something to start with. So it's about how can we accurately, and accurately is a big one, right? Usually we measure how much or how many, but not how many are right. So accurate measurement's important, but accurately measuring one asset type, signs, whatever it is, so that you can get a level of comfort with how the technology works, and that it's not this big, gigantic, as Mike said, we've got to demystify that this is difficult. It's not difficult. It's just new and different. So once people get used to it, it's really easy to do the inputs in the system. And once they're past the first cycle of that and they see a result generated, and again, what's the goal? You know, why do you want to track signs? What good does that do you, right? If we know what that goal looks like, we pick 1 to 3 things, measure it very well, and try and show that you can generate a result. That's usually how I try and have people try and tackle this, because in every single group you might be trying to implement with, the fear factor might be different. And so keeping it simple allows you to sort of weed out those things that are maybe cultural versus those things that might be technological or something else in there. You know, are there ways to make automation simple? That's a down the road problem. That's maybe not the first thing you want to tackle, right? Get into the system, do something well and accurate, show a win, and that small win leads to bigger wins. Now we have momentum, and now we're taking on the police department, like Mike said.
Okay. We have another great question. Is work being entered in Cartegraph or on the MPG collector app?
I've seen other departments using the collector app through Esri. We're doing everything through Cartegraph over here, though.
So it can be done maybe both ways?
Correct. That GIS integration is really a two-way integration between Cartegraph and Esri. So that works out great either direction you want to pull it. Whatever's easiest for, again, the people in the field to get that good data in, go with that method, yeah.
Cool.
And you're not entering data twice still, Mike, right?
Right.
Not violating the fundamental tenet of the Norseman. Good.
Mike, you got all kinds of questions coming in. How many years has Buffalo Grove been utilizing Cartegraph, and what has been the largest hurdle? That was a great question.
It is a great question. So like I said, we started this journey 5 to 6 years ago now. And I would say even when we were starting out, we didn't have the full GIS, integration built out right away. We started with street signs, we started with trees, we started with 1 or 2 assets just to kind of get the data cleaned up, understand how everything interacted, and then had to grow that over time. It was a good 3 years until we were humming along and really kind of had everything working to where it was making a difference with everything. So I think I mentioned before that little downturn when you're getting into something is just to get you on the high end later on. So you got to get through that initial piece.
We've had quite a few requests to have your presentation emailed, so maybe we can follow up with those people specifically. Unless you feel comfortable, we could send it to everybody that joined. That's up to you. But yeah, obviously that means that they liked it.
That's good.
Let's see, hold on, I want to make sure I've answered all the questions. I think we've gotten to all of them. Okay. Well, thank you guys. We will send an email out to everybody tomorrow. It sounds like Mike's okay with us sending this presentation, so I can put it on a shared link that we can send out to everybody with our thank you email. And then if you guys have questions, you all have my email address from the confirmations. I will make sure that in my follow-up email tomorrow, you guys have Mike and Nick's contact information as well. Thanks for joining Reline. Thank you guys. This was super, I think, informative to everybody who's maybe unfamiliar with Cartegraph or just wanted to get some more questions answered.
Sounds great.
Cassie.
Thanks, guys. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Hi, everyone.